It's being called the worst in more than 100 years. Waters that rage through areas stretching from southeastern British Columbia through to Medicine Hat, Alberta. A flood so devastating, it has made history. Tonight we take a look at the events inside of 1 week in our News First special report, Flood of the Century. It all started first thing Tuesday morning when a massive storm front moved into southern Alberta. Nearly 300 millimeters or 1 foot of rain fell in some areas. The result was overloaded sewers, flooded basements, and streets that turned into waterways. As the day turned into evening, the situation got even worse. The area in and around Pincher Creek was hardest hit. The town was in a state of emergency. Families had to flee their homes. Hundreds of volunteers gathered, trying to stop the rampaging river. The next day, the situation was even more critical. Down the road near Brockett, one family had to be airlifted to safety.
Last night, Laura Aftal didn't get much sleep. She was worried about her family. They were stranded in their farmhouse and the phone lines were down.
I was really worried about them, and I kept thinking about all the animals that were drowning.
Aftal's son was the first one airlifted out. That's when she was finally able to relax because she knew everyone was all right.
Brent's 8, and he's my one and only grandson, and Lisa is just about 10. It'll be her birthday on the 26th of June, and so it'll be quite an outing for them.
How you doing, Brent?
The 2 adults were taken out one at a time, while the children had the ride of their lives.
That's the typical way we rescue people off the mountain terrain. Because the kids are small, they don't fit into these harnesses unless they're small. So we put them in the bag, we tied a little improvised harness on and attached them in so that they had no chance of falling out.
Down the road in Pincher Creek, the damage was more widespread. Over 100 homes had to be evacuated. Volunteers worked through the night trying to hold off the water. However, in some areas, there was little they could do.
The waters are receding, but there was an awful lot of damage done over there throughout the night. We lost one of the major bridges in town.
The cleanup started early this morning. The top priority was to get power restored to the downtown area.
TransAlta is working to get the live wires off the streets and put them back on poles that we lost last night.
While the water has already started dropping, the work is far from over. It will be weeks before life returns to normal for the people that were hit the hardest.
The Waterton River spewed debris into the lake, and the results were immediately felt by those who live there. The town site was a complete mess. The Waterton Marina became part of the Bayshore Inn parking lot. Waterton's usually busy Main Street was completely submerged and nearly deserted. Except for those people trying to stave off further damage, the shops and restaurants stood empty. 1995 marks the centennial anniversary of Waterton Lakes National Park, a milestone no one here will ever forget. And the situation west of the area was no better. A long stretch of highway through the Crow's Nest Pass simply disappeared, and that cut off the main transportation link from Alberta to British Columbia. People living in both Fernie and Sparwood were evacuated as the swollen Elk and Crow's Nest rivers caused extensive damage along Highway 3. Businesses along the riverbanks were shut down, and work crews struggled to repair washed-out roads and bridges. In Fernie, a raging Coal Creek took out a CPR bridge. Area residents said the creek went from a small trickle to a furious waterway. Generations of people said this was the worst flooding in memory as they stood by, watching their homes and possessions under attack. By Wednesday, many people were already coping with disaster. In Lethbridge, residents were told to prepare for the worst, and as we'll tell you later, this was about to be at the center of controversy. In the early hours of Wednesday morning, the floodgates of the Oldman Dam were opened. At its peak, about 124,000 feet of water flowed into the dam every single second. That's at least 30 times the normal amount, and still, officials managed to hold back a quarter of the water. But it wouldn't be enough. Lethbridge residents were put on alert and warned to get ready.
City crews worked throughout the day to try and keep the rising river from the water treatment plant, and when it became more work than they could handle, the call came from Mayor David Carpenter for more volunteers.
I think it took 25 minutes to get 120 volunteers. Huh? Pretty special.
Those who came to volunteer worked diligently.
Everybody needs to help, do their part.
The need is big enough here, and the amount of damage that can actually be done down here is in probably $40 or $50 million to replace all these plants and water treatment plants, power station. It's quite a burden for the taxpayer to have to go over and replace that all.
And those who weren't volunteering were trying to watch the rising river any way possible.
We want to see how high the water is and what it's doing to the bridge, if anything. We weren't expecting to see so many people.
I've seen it flood before, but nothing like this. It's a little higher than I've seen it before. Yeah.
Whoop Up Drive was packed as people tried to get a peek at the river. It took close to an hour for most to get across.
Please reduce traffic on Whoop Up Drive to that which is absolutely necessary.
The water on the Whoop Up Drive bridge continues to rise, and there is a possibility the bridge could be closed tomorrow morning. The school divisions have been advised that there could be a problem with getting buses in tomorrow morning.
If Whoop Up Drive is closed, Highway 3 is also going to be closed. That means that citizens should make plans to deal with problems that will occur if there are no school buses and no regular traffic allowed on Whoop Up Drive.
There is also still a possibility that once the river peaks, West Lethbridge residents could be without power.
But the worst is yet to come. The river is expected to peak at about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. City crews will be working through the night to monitor the situation.
While Lethbridge waited for the river to peak, highways were completely flooded around the south, including the one I'm standing on. For thousands of people, it didn't seem like things could get much worse. But as we'll see after the break, this was only the beginning. Today, the Oldman River has receded, but at its peak on Thursday afternoon, it was nearly 8.5 meters or 25 feet above normal. In fact, so much water rushed through the city that it would fill a completely empty Oldman River dam in just 32 hours. Wildlife living here in the river valley scrambled for higher ground. Sometimes they were met by curious onlookers who frightened them back down toward the rushing water. Bridges and roads were closed, and that basically isolated the west side of Lethbridge. And as some people found out, and almost too late, the river wasn't waiting for anyone.
Overnight, the river did most of its damage. Indian Battle Park was underwater. Favorite walking paths were just a memory. The city had to close the Whoop Up Drive bridge at 6 o'clock this morning. The water still had 9 feet before it made it over the top, but city officials were worried about debris washing up onto the bridge. Highway 3 was also closed, so access to West Lethbridge was limited to emergencies only. Schools had to be closed because students couldn't be bused to class and teachers couldn't make it to work. Overnight, the sewage treatment plant had to be shut down and abandoned as the river flowed freely through it, but it posed no health risk. The city estimates damage at $500,000. Earlier efforts to save the water treatment plant paid off as the berm city crews and volunteers worked to build held. But others were not so lucky. Byron Alder had to be airlifted from his River Valley home early this morning. He went to check his house one last time last night, and when he tried to leave, the water had him surrounded. A boat rescue was too dangerous, so he had to wait for the helicopter. The Lethbridge Country Club was also surrounded. Mayor David Carpenter looked on to assess the damage as only the roof of the clubhouse could be seen. Another golf course, Paradise Canyon, did fare a little better. Pat Shabashi expects only 2 holes to have a lot of damage.
Fortunately for us, the peak of the crest and the strength of the river is on the opposite side of us, and we're actually getting the lapping, and there definitely is water moving, but not to the same velocity that it's moving on the other side.
And no one was happier than Joanne Penner later in the morning when she heard the river had hit its peak. The old man was almost knocking at her door.
I wasn't counting on beachfront property, which looks like it's becoming. I don't think any of us really were aware of the severity of it until perhaps last evening. I think I watched it all day yesterday, but last evening really became a little more aware of how serious it could become.
But as the river goes down, it becomes even more dangerous.
As the river recedes, the banks that are left become very, very slippery, very treacherous, very easy to lose your footing and fall into what is very fast-flowing water with virtually no chance of getting out.
Carpenter says anyone trying to get to the river valley will be evacuated immediately by police.
As we said, this is the worst flooding in this area in more than a century, but it isn't the first time. In the past 120 years, there's been a major flood in the river valley about once a decade. In 1902, the first of two major floods washed out much of a new irrigation system. And this was the scene in the river valley in the 1950s. In 1953, this flood forced the evacuation of Riverside, now known as Indian Battle Park. It also resulted in it being converted into a park and recreation area. As we told you earlier, authorities were forced to open the floodgates of the Oldman River Dam early on Wednesday morning. Now, the dam has been dogged by controversy ever since it first opened in July of 1992, and this week would be no different. Environmental protection officials say the flood would have occurred even if the dam hadn't been here, and that in fact, it might have made the situation a little better. But that answer wasn't good enough for people living on the Pagan Reserve.
Bernice Greer has lost everything. This is what her home looked like at the peak of the flood. This morning, as the water started to recede, she was able to go home and look at the damage firsthand.
The water came up about 2 feet and it's mud. It's that really soft, thick mud. It's just all over the place. It's coated everything. The only thing we got was the pictures on the wall. Other than that, everything's waterlogged and swelling.
In total, 17 homes were damaged on the Pagan Reserve. A lot of livestock was also lost. One of the few places where there was time to get the animals to higher ground was the band's ranch. However, everything else at the ranch was damaged, including the irrigation system. Most people on the reserve feel the Oldman River Dam created a lot of the problems. Greer says when the dam was built, she was told she had nothing to worry about.
They made guarantees that it wouldn't flood. They told us our house would never be flooded out, that it would just rise a bit, that they controlled the flow of the river.
Council is in the process of setting up talks with government officials.
Federal government has a fiduciary obligation to us with regarding our lands and resources and also our health and well-being. So I guess they will be held accountable for those. And also with the damages with the province also too, like they created a lot of the problems with developing the dam.
Right now the reserve is relying on stored water. It's not known how much damage was done to the pumping station. People are being asked to conserve water.
By Thursday, the cleanup had already begun for some southern Albertans. But while many people were thankful the worst was behind them, thousands of others were forced to flee their homes as catastrophe was on the way. By Friday, the Oldman receded, but to the east of us, it was Medicine Hat's turn. By Friday night, the water peaked at 10 meters or 35 feet above normal, and residents could only stand by and watch helplessly as the South Saskatchewan unleashed its fury.
The city of Medicine Hat has declared an emergency state. They knew it was coming, and now the South Saskatchewan River is ravaging the city.
In terms of evacuation and general safety of the public in the area that we feel is going to be a flood problem, we have a separate contingent of police officers dedicated just to work in that area.
Yeah, it's really fast, and I just hate to see anybody get caught in it.
Oh, we're aware.
Volunteers began sandbagging yesterday, and with the river cresting twice late this afternoon, residents of this area, known as the Flats, will need as much time as they can get.
We're running out of time. It's supposed to come up another 3-4 feet within an hour. And we have everything so packed in there, nobody knows what to grab or where to start.
Everything goes along as planned until an unforeseen emergency closes the city's bridges. The first of 2 propane tanks is on its way down the river. This one can hold 1,000 milliliters of propane, but authorities aren't sure how full it is. A sniper pumps 2 holes into the tank, which thankfully misses all 3 bridges.
If we fail at anything, we will be looking at how it can be corrected, but we know there will be criticism, but I feel really good about where we're at so far.
The Medicine Hat College is now home to about 70 people whose homes were evacuated.
Everything's going pretty good. Everybody seems to be pretty happy and mellowing out to the fact that they're going to be here for maybe a couple of days, and they have entertainment planned for this afternoon just to give the people something to do.
It's been 3 hours since you saw the first pictures of the flats. That house that's coming into range right now was evacuated about 3 hours ago, and as you can see, the damage that's done here is very obvious and very massive. The baseball diamonds, the outdoor rinks, backyards, and roads all fell victim. The city has shut down its sewage treatment plant as well. The river is expected to peak 10 meters above normal at 8 this evening, and for the residents here, the water levels won't fall soon enough.
In Pincher Creek on Friday, people started cleaning up and tallying their losses. As Rain Kuntz tells us in this next story, volunteers from all over gathered to help those hardest hit.
It's been 3 days since the water ripped through the town of Pincher Creek. For people who are seeing the damage for the first time today, it looks devastating. For those involved in the cleanup, it's nothing compared to what they found the morning after.
Like you come in now and you look around and the place is cleaning up pretty good and it's drying out and you can see your floors and you can see bits and pieces of your lawn.
Robert Frost has been on an emotional roller coaster the last few days. He admits the support he's received has helped him cope.
There's some people again this morning and they just come in and walk through your front door and you realize they're there and they just say, I guess you wouldn't turn down any help, would you? Say, no. What can we do?
Down the street, an elderly lady's basement flooded. She can't do the work herself, so some men from Christian Disaster Relief stopped by to help.
Of course, you feel that somebody cares.
It feels good. What can you say? Like you say, she's totally helpless, and we're just trying to do what we can.
Volunteers are coming from all over. People are donating time and equipment for the cleanup.
It's been really good, especially by the Mennonite community. They have just been terrific. We've got a number of people that have volunteered, but some can't come until tomorrow, like they have jobs and things like that.
It will be a long time before life returns to normal for many residents, but at least with the help and support of hundreds of volunteers, the cleanup will be a little bit easier.
The river has receded about 2.5 meters in the past 24 hours, but it's left its mark. Water lines around the sewage treatment plant are telltale signs of how high it actually got here. First thing this morning, the city pulled the plug, so to speak, on the berm it had built around the plant. After all the water has drained, it will be able to pump out the plant's underground galleries. The primary clarifiers are running, which gets rid of about 80% of the effluent before it goes into the river.
It's not raw sewage, it's primary treatment. It's as good as what Victoria and Vancouver do every day. We will attempt to get the plant operational as soon as possible. The cleanup is horrendous. It will take a lot of effort.
Oldman says it will be many weeks before the plant is up and running. Equipment is coming from as far away as Edmonton to help in the cleanup. The cleanup is also going on at the Lethbridge Country Club. Volunteers work to shovel the silt the river left behind. Meantime, at Paradise Canyon, the damage isn't as bad, but it will still be some time before the extent of it is known.
We've had all the homeowners and members and stuff have been volunteering their support and their help, and again, we really can't do too much until we know where it's gonna, when the water's back down, and once we know that, we just sort of follow Mark, and we'll I think what he's gonna do is set up some work teams and push her all back in, and hopefully we're playing golf in the next little bit.
People are causing the real problem for the city. Their curiosity with the flooding has caused a lot of headache.
Our police were chasing out 4x4s until 4 this morning, and I just want you to give some sort of a thought as to what damage those tracks could have done as we're trying to get that turf back in place. Mountain bikes have torn up what's left of some of the greens on the golf courses.
There are a lot of people still wanting to help out, though. At this point, the city isn't sure how it will use the volunteers to clean up, but they will be used.
What a difference a day can make. Yesterday, the banks of the South Saskatchewan River were packed with people who wanted a front row seat to witness what they are calling the flood of the century. Today it was a different story. Only a few came to watch, to capture a memory of a time they will never forget.
A lot of water, a lot of debris, and sort of makes one nervous to see the power of such a river. I've never seen anything quite like this, so I can't really comment much farther than that.
For 2 days, Medicine Hat fought Mother Nature, but in the end they lost a battle they had no chance of winning. Today, those who live in the city's oldest and lowest lying area, known as the Flats, were allowed to go home and assess the damage.
Well, it's been kind of a stressful couple days, I tell you that much, because I wasn't even prepared for this. I was totally shocked when they told me that this flood was coming. It was like, you kind of hear it, but it's like, no, it's not going to get us. But, I was kind of shocked when you walk in the door. Well, I don't think I'll ever forget this. It's kind of something you tell your great-grandchildren. I survived it anyway, and everybody's safe. That's all I cared about.
The good people rally, and the sense of neighborhood will be better. There isn't any doubt about that. There will be more of a community spirit. So there's always a downside and an upside to these kinds of things.
Earlier today, the City of Medicine Hat implemented a plan. Streets in the low-lying areas will remain closed, and only those who can produce ID to prove where they live will be allowed to go in and assess the damage. Those whose homes were flooded will have to wait until the river drops before they're allowed to pump any of the water out. And more than one business has been affected by the flooding. The Medicine Hat Blue Jays will be under the gun to make their opening day, which is less than 2 weeks away.
Our opening game is June 21st, and I like to be optimistic we can be ready, but it depends what's under that water there. And the problem is now you can see that we're below the river line, so now this water's sitting here. It ain't going to retreat. So we have to do something to pump it out or knock a bank down or something to get that water out of here.
And as for the residents of Medicine Hat and the rest of southern Alberta, they're supposed to document all of the damage they received through this week of flooding. Early in the week, the Klein government will meet to discuss how these victims will be compensated.
Cleanup efforts are expected to take days, maybe weeks, and it will probably be longer than that before we know the full extent of the damage. Dollar values are already in the millions. This has been a week Southern Albertans will never forget as they try and cope with the flood of the century.
And I kept thinking about all the animals that were drowning.
All citizens in the river valley within the city limits have been evacuated with the exception of Paradise Canyon.
It's kind of something you tell your great-grandchildren. I survived it anyway, and everybody's safe. That's all I cared about.